Say hi to the sharks, my daughter-in-law murmured just before giving me a gentle shove off the yacht's deck. My son Ethan stood nearby, smiling like it was all some kind of joke. Their plan was simple: take my $3 billion fortune and live happily ever after without me. But that night when they came home, I was already there, sitting in my favorite armchair waiting for them, with a little surprise of my own. If you're watching this, go ahead and subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. But let me rewind a bit and explain how what started as an ordinary Tuesday morning ended with me plunging into the Atlantic. I should have seen it coming, honestly. Still, at 67, I held on to this silly belief that family actually meant something. That blood was thicker than seawater, so to speak. The day began beautifully. Ethan had called me himself, not through his assistant, which looking back should have been the first red flag. He invited me on what he called a celebration cruise on his brand new yacht. "Mom, we just want to toast your recovery from surgery," he said in that warm, easy tone I used to mistake for real affection. Just the three of us, like family. I'd been recovering from hip replacement surgery for 6 long weeks, and truthfully, I was craving any sign that Ethan and his wife Brianna still wanted me in their lives. Ever since my husband Richard passed 2 years ago, leaving me with his tech empire's fortune, things had grown distant, colder. So that morning I took my time getting ready. I slipped on my navy blue dress, the one Richard always said made my eyes shine, and caught a cab to the marina in Newport, Rhode Island. The yacht was a thing of beauty. Sleek, white and gleaming, probably worth more than most people's homes. Ethan greeted me at the dock with a hug that felt staged, while Brianna watched from above, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Isn't she gorgeous?" Ethan said, gesturing proudly toward the yacht. 42 feet of pure luxury. "We're thinking of taking her down to the Caribbean next month." What he didn't mention was that the money for that yacht had come from me, from the $3 million I'd given him last year to invest in his so-called consulting business. A business I was starting to think existed only on paper. The first hour wasn't bad. The weather was perfect, the water calm, and the Massachusetts coastline slowly faded into the distance. Brianna handed out mimosas, chatting about how they planned to remodel the house. My old house, the one I'd signed over to them after Richard's death because I thought moving into a smaller condo would make life simpler. Then Ethan started asking questions. Casual ones at first. About my will. About the trust. About whether I'd thought of simplifying things for them. "Probate can be such a hassle, Mom," he said, pouring me more champagne than I needed. "We just want to make sure everything's taken care of." That's when I noticed Brianna holding her phone, pretending to take selfies, but angling it just right to record me. Recording while I sipped my drink, while I spoke about money. Building evidence. Setting the scene. It hit me all at once. The surgery they'd helped arrange. The paperwork they'd handled afterward. The power of attorney documents they'd brought to the hospital, saying it was just temporary, just to help with the bills. And my financial advisor who suddenly stopped returning my calls. "Ethan," I said quietly, setting down my glass. "I'd like to go back to shore." That's when the mask came off. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mom," he said, voice suddenly cold, almost unfamiliar. "We need to talk about your health. About your memory issues." "Memory issues?" I repeated. I was sharper than the two of them combined. "You've been showing signs of dementia," Brianna chimed in, stepping closer. "It's all documented. The doctors agree you can't handle your finances anymore." I stared at them both. Every piece fell into place. The distance from shore. The lack of witnesses. Their plan wasn't just about control. It was about erasing me completely. "Mom, we're trying to help you," Ethan said softly, though his eyes were ice cold. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I stood, my hip aching but my mind perfectly clear. "And if I refuse?" I asked. That's when Brianna finally smiled, really smiled, for the first time all day. "Well," she said lightly, "an elderly woman fresh out of surgery probably mixed up her meds, got dizzy on the boat," she shrugged. "Tragic accidents happen. I'd raised this man. Taught him to ride a bike, paid for college, for his wedding, for his home. And now he stood there, nodding along while his wife planned my death. You're insane if you think you'll get away with this," I said. "Actually, Mom," Ethan replied calmly, pulling out a folder, "we've thought it through." He held it out, papers transferring everything to them for my own protection. "Just sign here and we all go home happy." I looked at the documents, at my son's face, at Brianna's phone still recording. Then I looked out at the endless blue water. Terrifying, yes, but not nearly as terrifying as them. Go to hell, I said. That's when Brianna leaned in close and whispered, say hi to the sharks, before giving me that final, calculated push. Just a sudden shove, I tell the camera, when I was off balance and staring at the water. One moment I was standing there in my navy dress, the next I was tumbling headfirst into the cold Atlantic. As the chill hit me, I heard Ethan yelling, Mom. Oh God, Mom. But under that panic, I also heard Brianna, her voice low, talking to someone on the phone. Yes, we'll need you to file the emergency petition first thing Monday morning. She's clearly not competent, too. Then the sea closed over my head, and for a while, their betrayal was the least of my problems. I'm a strong swimmer. Richard and I used to do laps every morning, yet the shock of that cold water and the weight of my wet clothes pulled me down. I kicked off my shoes, fought for the surface, and finally broke through, gasping. I saw the yacht, and then I saw them. The boat speeding away, leaving me there bobbing in the open ocean. I remember thinking, they really are going to leave me to die. That's when I noticed a small fishing boat approaching. The captain introduced himself as Mark Sullivan, grizzled, maybe in his 60s, the kind of man who looked like he'd rather jump into shark-ridden seas than watch someone drown. With him was his grandson Luke, a lanky teenager who helped haul me aboard their vessel, the Sea Daisy. Holy hell, ma'am, what happened to you? Mark asked as they wrestled me onto the deck. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, I could barely get the words out. Mark wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of salt and diesel while Luke started the engine. My family, I managed to say between teeth that wouldn't stop knocking. Mark's face went hard. We some take off like a bat out of hell, he said. Didn't even look back. Who leaves someone floating in the middle of the ocean? I wanted to answer, the kind who stand to inherit $3 billion if I vanish, but I only said out loud, the kind who aren't really family. Mark keyed the radio and called in what looked like a routine rescue. This is Sea Daisy, we've got a woman we pulled from the water about 12 miles southeast of Cape Cod. Conscious, responsive, needs medical attention. I grabbed his arm, panic and calculation both in my voice. Please, I whispered. Don't tell them you found me. Not yet. Mark studied me with the tired, clear eyes of a man who'd seen people run from more than just storms. You in some kind of trouble? He asked. Yes, I said, taking a shaky breath, but not the kind you're thinking of. I need to get to shore without anyone knowing I survived. Can you help me? Luke looked to his grandfather, unsure. Grandpa, shouldn't we? He started. Should and shouldn't are funny things, Mark said slowly. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like following the rules. He reached for the radio and then, deadpan, sent a false update. Sea Daisy. False alarm. Rescue cancelled. Debris in the water. All clear. We limped toward a little private dock in a cove Mark knew, a place he trusted. He dropped me off at a tiny bed and breakfast called Harborview, run by Margaret Collins, a tough woman in her 70s who didn't ask questions. Cash only, she said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Margaret took one look at my soaked clothes and started heating up chicken broth like that'd fix everything, while I told her in halting pieces about Ethan and Brianna, about the yacht, the documents, the power of attorney nonsense, and the money that had disappeared. Margaret didn't blink. She ladled soup into a bowl and said, I've seen folks running from all kinds of trouble. As long as you don't bring trouble here, you're welcome. That evening, while Ethan and Brianna were probably at the police station filing reports about their tragically missing mother, I sat at Margaret's kitchen table in borrowed clothes, drinking second and then third cups of coffee, and I started making a plan. Mark had agreed to be my ears and eyes. He used his boat for legal fishing charters, which meant he was a fixture at the marina where Ethan kept the yacht. He could watch their comings and goings, overhear conversations, maybe even do a little quiet digging. One question kept gnawing at me. How were they going to make this legal? Even if I died in an accident, there'd be protocols, investigations. Someone had to be feeding them information, someone on the inside who knew about my accounts, my trusts, my paperwork. That night I made a list. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, bank officers, trust officials, anyone who'd had access to my financial life since Richard died. Someone had been passing them details, helping them scheme. I was going to find out who. I told Mark, and he nodded once, the kind of nod that means trouble will be returned in kind. You're officially dead to them, I said, feeling the odd thrill of it. Let them think they won. For now. I looked at my hands, the skin still wrinkled from the ocean, and felt a cold, steady anger. Then I'm going to destroy them, I said. Mark let out a grin that was almost boyish. Now that, he said, sounds like a plan worth helping with. Before I could plan my next move, I needed to know exactly what story they were feeding the world about my so-called disappearance. Margaret still had this old desktop computer with painfully slow internet, but it did the job. I spent hours scrolling through headlines about the tragic boating accident that had supposedly claimed the life of Richard Sullivan's widow. Every article told the same story, a grieving family coping with an elderly woman's decline. Ethan was quoted left and right, talking about how confused I'd been lately, how my memory had been slipping. Brianna, bless her heart, had apparently cried on camera about how worried they'd been for my safety. They'd even included a photo, me at Ethan's birthday party last year, holding a drink and looking a little dazed. I remembered that night clearly. I'd been confused because no one told me it was a surprise party. I walked into what I thought would be a quiet dinner with my son and found 20 strangers in my old home. But in that photo I just looked lost and frail. Exactly the image they wanted the world to see. The obituary was already up online. Margaret Sullivan, beloved mother and grandmother, passed away in a tragic boating accident while enjoying a family outing. In lieu of flowers, it read, the family requests donations to the Alzheimer's Association. Even in death they were pushing the narrative of my so-called mental decline. Bastards, I muttered, snapping the laptop shut. Margaret looked up from her knitting, her eyebrow raised. Planning something special for them? She asked. Oh yes, I said quietly. Something very special. The funeral was more crowded than I expected, considering I was supposed to be halfway to losing my mind before my death. I watched from across the cemetery through a pair of binoculars Mark had lent me, crouched behind a maintenance shed that gave me a perfect view. Ethan hadn't spared a dime, premium casket, empty of course, towers of flowers, even a printed program with my photo on the front. He and Brianna stood there in coordinated black, receiving condolences with grace and sorrow that could win awards. What struck me most wasn't them though, it was the people crying. My neighbor Elaine was openly sobbing. My book club friends were there too, dabbing at their eyes. Even Dr. Peterson, who'd done my hip surgery, stood off to the side looking solemn. These people cared. And meanwhile my son and his wife stood there, soaking up the sympathy for a death they'd caused. See anything interesting? Mark whispered, crouching next to me. Besides my son's Oscar-worthy acting? I said. Yeah. Look who's not here. Mark adjusted his binoculars. Like who? My financial advisor Thomas Blake. My lawyer Patricia Walsh. My accountant Michael Torres. I lowered the binoculars slowly. The realization hit hard. The people who should be here, the ones who manage my estate, are all mysteriously absent. Maybe they're handling paperwork, Mark offered. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they can't stomach watching a funeral for someone they helped bury on paper. After the service I watched Ethan and Brianna work the crowd like seasoned politicians, shaking hands, hugging people, smiling just enough. But I noticed something else too. The second anyone asked about my final days, they'd find an excuse to move along. Classic deflection. That afternoon, Mark drove me back to Margaret's place in his pickup, taking side roads to stay off the radar. It had been 4 days since my death, and I was starting to appreciate the strange freedom that came with being officially gone. I need to get into my old house, I said as we pulled into the driveway. That's risky, Mark warned. They're probably staying there. Not according to property records, I said, pulling out the notes I'd scribbled down that morning. They're still in their own place. My old house has been sitting empty ever since I moved to the condo. But someone's paying the bills. Electricity, water, heat. The place is being maintained. Why would they do that if no one's living there? Mark's brow furrowed. Good question. I think it's time I found out. That night he dropped me off 3 blocks away from my former home in Beacon Hill, Boston. The house where Richard and I had spent 35 years. Where I'd raised Ethan, hosted dinner parties, built a life. The house I'd signed over to my son because I thought family actually meant something. It was just past midnight. The street was quiet, just the occasional car rolling by. I still had my key. Ethan had never asked for it back. I slipped around to the back door and let myself in, feeling like a burglar breaking into my own life. The house didn't feel empty, it felt wrong. I crept through the rooms with the small flashlight Mark had given me, keeping away from the street-facing windows. The furniture was covered in sheets, but new pieces had appeared. A leather couch worth more than some cars, a sleek entertainment system that definitely hadn't been there before. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge and froze. It wasn't filled with random leftovers or bottled water. It was stocked, fresh produce, imported cheeses, organic meats. The kind of groceries you only buy when you're living somewhere full-time. But it was in Richard's old study that I finally found what I was looking for. The desk was buried under stacks of papers, legal forms, bank records, medical notes, and right in the middle sat something that made my blood run cold. A detailed outline titled The Margaret Project. My own name turned into a code word for my elimination. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. They'd been working on this for over a year, tracking every supposed symptom of my mental decline. There were doctor visits where they'd coached me to act confused, social events designed to make me look disoriented. The birthday photo from the newspaper, the one at Ethan's surprise party, was listed as evidence. They'd deliberately set me up, making sure I looked lost and frail. Even the medication mix-up that sent me to the ER 3 months earlier wasn't an accident. They'd switched my prescriptions. Every single moment I'd seemed off balance or forgetful had been carefully staged and recorded as proof that I was losing my mind. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the timeline. It was a letter tucked near the bottom, signed only with the initials MT. The timeline needs to be accelerated. Margaret's been asking too many questions about the power of attorney paperwork. If she consults a lawyer independently, the plan falls apart. I recommend moving to Phase 3 within 2 weeks. Phase 3. According to the notes, that meant my death. I snapped photo after photo with the disposable camera Mark had given me, trying to keep my hands steady. Then outside, a car door slammed. Headlights swept across the window. Voices. Ethan and Brianna were home, coming back from their little grief performance. I froze, listening. Think Dr. Peterson bought it? Ethan asked as they came inside. She was crying too hard to think straight, Brianna said, her tone casual. What's she gonna do? Launch an investigation? People fall off boats all the time. What about the will? Ethan asked. Probate opens Monday, she answered. MT says we'll have access to the accounts in 6 weeks. I crept toward the back door, every step careful. Then just as I reached the garden, I heard it, a baby crying. I stopped dead. Baby. Ethan and Brianna had never mentioned having a child. My heart hammered in my chest as I crouched behind the rose bushes I'd planted 20 years ago. A baby in my house. That changed everything. This wasn't just about greed anymore. It was something much bigger. When Mark picked me up 15 minutes later, I was still shaking. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said. Worse, I whispered. I've seen my replacement. I told him everything. About the documents, the letter from MT, and the baby. Mark frowned deeply. They never mentioned having kids. Ethan always said they weren't ready, too focused on their careers. I pulled the camera from my bag. I need to get these developed, but not anywhere local. Not where they have connections. Mark nodded. I know a guy over in Gloucester, runs a 1-hour photo shop. Keeps his mouth shut. While we waited for the photos, we sat in his truck outside a gas station, sipping burnt coffee and trying to make sense of it all. So they've been building this setup for over a year, Mark said, scanning my notes. Making you look incompetent, getting someone on the inside to help. And now there's a baby. That doesn't add up. I stared out the window. Maybe it's not their baby. Mark turned. What are you saying? Think about it, I said. If they're trying to steal my fortune, they'd want a legitimate heir. Someone who could inherit everything if something happened to them. But to make that legal, the baby would need the right bloodline. His jaw tightened. You think they stole a baby? I think they did something, I said. And whoever MT is, they're at the center of it. When the photos were ready, we laid them out on the dashboard. Every image was proof. Fake medical reports, financial projections, and that disgusting timeline. But one photo made me go cold all over again. A birth certificate I'd almost missed. Baby Sullivan, born 3 weeks ago. Mother, Brianna Sullivan. Father, Ethan Sullivan. I stared at it, disbelief burning in my chest. This is impossible, I said. Brianna was on that yacht with me 4 days ago. She wasn't recovering from childbirth. Mark's eyes widened. So the certificate's fake. Completely fabricated, I said. But if it's fake, whose baby is it? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in Margaret's guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind looping through every awful detail. My son and his wife had spent a year destroying my reputation, planning my murder, forging documents. And now there was a baby whose existence made no sense. The next morning I came to a decision that surprised even me. I'm going back, I told Mark over breakfast. He looked alarmed. Back to the house. I shook my head. No. Somewhere else. I'm going to follow them. Mark nearly spit out his coffee. That's dangerous as hell, Margaret. If they see you. They won't, I cut in. Because as far as they know, I'm fish food. I spread a local map across Margaret's kitchen table. Look, they have to take that baby somewhere during the day. Daycare, nanny, something. Babies don't just vanish for 8 hours while their parents pretend to be grieving saints. Mark leaned over the map, frowning. And what exactly do you expect to find? The truth, I said. About that baby, and about whoever this MT really is. Margaret, who'd been quietly rinsing dishes in the sink, finally turned around. I know someone who could help, she said. A private investigator here in town. Professional, discreet, and good at following people without being seen. I can't involve anyone else, I protested. The fewer people who know I'm alive, the better. Margaret shook her head, drying her hands on a dish towel. Honey, you're way past the point of handling this on your own. These people already tried to kill you. You really think they'll hesitate if they find out you're breathing? He was right, of course. But bringing in a private investigator meant expanding the circle. Admitting to yet another person that I wasn't actually dead. What kind of favor does this investigator owe you? I asked. Margaret smiled just a little. The kind where my grandson didn't end up in jail for doing something stupid when he was 22. By noon, I was sitting in Danny Crawford's small office above a sandwich shop in downtown Gloucester, telling my story for the third time that week. Danny was about 50, hair going gray early with sharp eyes that missed nothing. So, he said finally, leaning back, you want me to follow your son and daughter-in-law, find out where that mysterious baby came from, and identify whoever this MT person is? That's right. And how exactly are you paying me? He asked, one eyebrow raised. Because according to the papers, all your accounts are frozen pending probate. I slid an envelope across the desk. Cash. I had emergency funds hidden in a safety deposit box Ethan doesn't know about. My husband always insisted we keep something liquid just in case. Danny flipped through the bills, enough for 2 weeks of surveillance, and nodded. All right. I'll need photos of your son and his wife, plus any addresses where they might be staying. I handed over everything I had, including the pictures I'd taken during my break-in at the house. Danny studied them closely, especially the ones with the signature marked MT. This handwriting looks familiar, he said, pulling out a small magnifying glass. Professional, neat, but it's got some quirks. Mind if I run it through a few databases? Do whatever you need to do, I told him. He nodded, then added, one more thing. If these people are as dangerous as you say, we set a safety protocol. You check in with me every 12 hours. If I don't hear from you, I go straight to the police. Agreed, I said, though the thought of involving law enforcement made me uneasy. The less official attention, the better, for now. That afternoon I went back to Margaret's, the smell of her coffee and lemon cleaner wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time in weeks I felt something close to relief. I finally had help, real help. In less than 24 hours I'd start getting answers. And Danny Crawford didn't disappoint. By the end of the second day he'd uncovered more than I had in months of living under the same roof with those snakes. Your son's been busy since you died, Danny said, spreading photographs across Margaret's kitchen table. Multiple meetings with lawyers, 2 trips to the bank, and 3 visits to a private medical facility outside Boston. Medical facility? I repeated. Whitmore Reproductive Services, he said. Very exclusive, very expensive, and very private. He tapped a photo of Ethan and Brianna walking into a sleek glass building. They specialize in surrogacy arrangements for wealthy clients who want complete discretion. The puzzle pieces clicked, and the picture that formed made me sick to my stomach. They bought a baby, I whispered. Danny nodded grimly. Looks like it. And not just any baby. According to my contact at Whitmore, they requested a newborn that could pass as their biological child. Arrangements were made about 8 months ago, paid in cash, with instructions to have a pre-filled birth certificate ready. Margaret set down 3 mugs of coffee and joined us at the table. So, let me get this straight. They planned your death, bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and had someone inside your financial circle helping them pull it off? About that, Danny said, reaching into his folder and pulling out another photo. I think I found MT. The photo showed a woman in her 40s, auburn hair cropped short, holding an expensive-looking briefcase and shaking Ethan's hand outside a downtown law office. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Miranda Torres, Danny explained. Partner at Morrison Torres & Associates. Estate planners for some of Boston's wealthiest families. Torres, I murmured. Wait. My accountant's name is Michael Torres. Are they related? Danny smiled thinly. Married. And here's where it gets interesting. Miranda's been quietly building her own client list. Elderly, wealthy, and usually estranged from their families. She calls it family transition planning. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse racing. Family transition planning, I repeated. That's one hell of a euphemism for assisted theft. I stared at the photo until the memory finally clicked. That's where I'd seen her. About 6 months earlier, Ethan had dragged me to some charity gala in Boston. One of those events where everyone pretends to care about the cause while scoping out who has the biggest donation check. That's where I met her. Miranda Torres. She'd been charming, polished, and oddly interested in my estate planning. Kept asking questions about my trusts, my foundation, my succession strategy. I thought she was just networking. Turns out she was casing me. Danny nodded. Makes sense. Miranda has a very particular kind of business model. She targets wealthy seniors with complicated family situations, people whose relatives have a lot to gain from their decline. Then she helps those families accelerate the process. You mean murder, Margaret said flatly. Danny gave a humorless half-smile. Let's say she builds legal frameworks that let families take control of assets before their loved ones are technically gone. She calls it compassionate intervention. She's done it at least 6 times in the last 3 years. He spread more photos across the table. Miranda meeting with different families, entering law offices, visiting what looked like private clinics. She's running a full-blown operation. Finds the rich, vulnerable target. Helps the greedy relatives manufacture evidence of dementia or incompetence. Provides the legal cover for transferring assets. And she takes a generous cut of the inheritance for her trouble. When a target gets suspicious or resists, he paused, eyes dark. Boating accidents. Falls downstairs. Overdoses. Always tragic, always believable, always profitable. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about me or my money anymore. This was a machine. A system designed to erase people like me and turn our lives into spreadsheets. How many people has she killed? I asked quietly. Proved? None, Danny said. Suspected? At least 12 over the last 5 years. He's smart. She works with families who can sell a clean story. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Then we stop her. We will, Danny said. But first we need to know exactly what Ethan and Brianna have already set in motion. Because according to my contacts, they filed preliminary probate documents yesterday. He pulled out a legal folder and set it on the table. They're claiming you died intestate, no valid will, which would make them your sole heirs. They're also claiming that any existing documents are invalid because you signed them while you were mentally incompetent. That's insane, I said. I have a will. A detailed, notarized will I updated 2 years ago. I know, Danny said quietly. I found it. He opened the folder and slid the document toward me. My will, my signature, but the contents were completely different. Every clause, every bequest rewritten. They replaced it, I whispered. The fake version left everything to Ethan with a clause covering any future children, including that poor baby they'd acquired through Whitmore Reproductive Services. I stood up and walked to Margaret's kitchen window, staring out at the gray ocean. A week ago I'd been a lonely widow desperate for family. Now I was a murder victim who'd lived to see her killers, and realized they were part of a corporate death ring for profit. There's something else, Danny said softly. About the baby. I turned back. What about it? The birth mother was a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Collins. Runaway from Maine. No family, no safety net. Miranda found her at a shelter in Portland and offered her $50,000 to carry a child for a loving couple. Where is she now? I asked, already dreading the answer. Danny's face hardened. According to the official record, she died from complications during childbirth. But a nurse at Whitmore told me Sarah was perfectly healthy. No risk factors. Normal pregnancy right up until delivery. The implication hit like a wave. They killed her, I said. I think so, Danny replied, but there's no proof yet. He gathered the photos, his expression grim. What I can prove is that your son and daughter-in-law are part of a criminal network that's been systematically murdering the elderly for their estates. And tomorrow morning, they're meeting with Miranda Torres to finalize the transfer of your assets. I sat down, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Where? Torres's office downtown. Tenning. I looked from Danny to Margaret, then down at the photo of my son shaking hands with a professional killer. Then I guess it's time, I said quietly, for Margaret Sullivan to rise from the dead. The hardest part of planning your return from the dead? Deciding who gets the shock first. I could confront Ethan and Brianna privately, let them explain themselves, lie to my face, but that would imply they deserved an explanation. Or I could make my resurrection public, let the world learn I was alive at the same time they did. Instead, I chose option 3, strategic haunting. You want to what? Danny asked, eyebrows shooting up. I want them to know I'm alive, I said. But not how much I know. I want them scared, off balance, paranoid, making mistakes. Margaret grinned. Psychological warfare. I like it. The plan was simple, elegant, and deliciously cruel. While Ethan, Brianna, and Miranda sat in that downtown meeting, dividing up my fortune like vultures, I'd be making my presence felt, in ways subtle enough to terrify but not explain. Danny had found out that the baby was being kept at Ethan's house during the day, cared for by a private nurse hired through one of Miranda Torres's front companies. Her name was Carol Peterson, and she had no idea she was looking after a baby that had been purchased through the death of a teenage girl. She's clean, Danny told me after running a background check. Single mom, registered nurse, no record. She probably thinks she's helping a nice family with child care. Then she deserves to know the truth, I said. So that morning, while Ethan and Brianna were downtown signing papers to officially erase me from existence, I stood on the front porch of my old house and rang the doorbell. Carol was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and a baby bottle still in her hand. She wore scrubs covered in cartoon animals, the kind you wear when you're used to comforting people. Can I help you? She asked. Hello, Carol, I said softly. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I believe you're caring for my grandson. The color drained from her face. She knew that name, everyone did. It had been plastered across the news for a week. The wealthy widow lost in a boating accident. You're dead, she stammered. I smiled faintly. Yes, I've been reading about that. Fascinating story, though not exactly accurate. May I come in? We need to talk. She stepped aside slowly, eyes wide, as if I might vanish at any moment. But you on the news, your son said. My son, I interrupted, has said quite a lot of things. Most of them lies. I followed her into what used to be my living room. It felt surreal, the same walls but a stranger's life unfolding inside them. In the center of the room sat a baby in a bouncy seat, gurgling happily. My breath caught. Oh, I whispered, stepping closer. Oh, you beautiful little thing. He couldn't have been more than 3 weeks old. Dark hair, serious brown eyes, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my first car. The room was filled with high-end baby gear. Top-of-the-line stroller, smart crib, premium everything. What's his name? I asked, crouching beside the seat. Baby Sullivan, Carol said automatically, then corrected herself. They said they were naming him Richard Jr. after his grandfather, but they haven't decided for sure. They haven't decided, I said softly, because they don't know him well enough to name him. Because he's not really their baby, is he? Carol sank onto the couch, confusion and fear mixing on her face. I don't understand. You're supposed to be dead. And Ethan and Brianna are supposed to be grieving parents, I finished for her. But Carol, listen carefully. This baby is not their biological child. They bought him through an illegal surrogacy that ended with the death of his birth mother. And 6 days ago, they tried to kill me so they could steal my fortune and raise this child as their heir. That's impossible, she said weakly. I opened my bag and pulled out the photos Danny had taken, along with copies of the documents I'd found in Ethan's home office. The Margaret Project, the fake medical reports, the Whitmore contracts. I spread them out across the coffee table, letting her see it all. Her disbelief slowly turned to horror. The girl who gave birth to this baby was named Sarah Collins, I said quietly. 17 years old. No family, no support. Miranda Torres found her in a Portland shelter and promised her $50,000 to help a loving couple have a child. She died in childbirth, under circumstances that don't add up. Tears filled Carol's eyes. She looked at the baby like she was seeing him for the first time. He's an orphan. Yes, I said. And if Ethan and Brianna get away with this, he'll grow up believing they're his parents, never knowing his real mother died to give him life. Carol wiped at her face. What do you want me to do? I want you to document everything. Take pictures. Write down what they tell you, how they act, who visits. And then help me make sure this baby grows up knowing the truth. Carol nodded through her tears. Then his real name should be Richard Sarah Sullivan, after his grandfather and his mother. I smiled. That's perfect. I spent nearly an hour with Carol and baby Richard Sarah, taking photos, recording details, outlining what came next. Carol agreed to keep caring for him as if nothing had changed, but secretly gather evidence and feed it to me through Danny. They'll be home around noon, she warned as I got ready to leave. They always stop by for lunch, check on him, make calls, handle business. Perfect, I said. By then they'll have received my first message. While I'd been at the house, Danny had been stationed downtown. From his car, parked across from Miranda Torres's glass office tower, he watched Ethan and Brianna arrive, shaking hands with Torres as if they were closing some corporate deal instead of finalizing my murder. He caught everything with his telephoto lens. Every handshake, every smile. But the real show started when Mark delivered a small envelope to their lawyer's office. It was written on my finest stationery. Dear Ethan and Brianna, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to look. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Richard Sarah. He's beautiful. The messenger delivered it at exactly 11:47 a.m. Danny watched from across the street as the receptionist carried it into the meeting. 2 minutes later, all three of them, Ethan, Brianna, and Miranda Torres, came flying out of the building white as ghosts, eyes darting in every direction. And just like that, the psychological warfare had begun. That afternoon, when Ethan and Brianna came home from their meeting, expecting to find their quiet little conspiracy still neatly in place, they were in for a surprise. Because I wasn't just alive. I was furious. I was armed with evidence. And I was done being their victim. I'd positioned myself right in my favorite armchair, the one Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary, facing the front door of what used to be my house. When I heard the lock click and the door swing open, I didn't move. I just smiled. The look on their faces was worth every miserable second I'd spent clinging to life in the Atlantic. Hello, darlings, I said pleasantly, not even bothering to stand. How was your meeting? I hope you didn't sign anything too important while I was away. Brianna screamed, a full, blood-curdling scream that echoed off the walls. Ethan froze, still holding his keys, staring at me like he could make me vanish if he just blinked hard enough. Surprised? I asked. I have to say the reports of my death were terribly premature. Although I did enjoy my own obituary. Alzheimer's donations? Really? That was a nice touch. Right on cue, Carol appeared from the kitchen carrying baby Richard Sarah. She'd been waiting just like we'd planned. Mrs. Sullivan asked me to bring the baby out, she said carefully. She wanted to meet her grandson properly. Her grandson? Brianna stammered, her voice trembling. Carol, this woman she's dead. I offered helpfully. Yes, I've heard that rumor. Turns out drowning's a lot harder than it looks. Especially when there are still good people left in the world. Ethan finally managed to find his voice. Mom, we thought the Coast Guard searched for debris, I interrupted. Not survivors. Funny how that happens when nobody actually reports a person overboard. I reached for the baby and Carol placed him gently in my arms. "Hello there, little Richard Sarah," I whispered. "I'm your real grandmother, the kind who doesn't try to buy you with blood money." "His name isn't Richard Sarah," Brianna snapped, color flooding back into her cheeks. "His name is whatever we decide because he's our son." "Is he?" I asked, looking down at the baby's calm, curious eyes. Then raising my gaze to hers, "Tell me, Brianna, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago on that yacht, you looked remarkably slim for someone who'd delivered 3 weeks earlier." Brianna hesitated. It was private." "Yes," I said evenly. "Very private. So private that the real mother died giving birth, under mysterious circumstances." I looked at both of them. "Did you know her name was Sarah Collins? 17 years old. From Maine. No family to ask questions when she disappeared." The silence that followed was deafening. Carol gasped, covering her mouth. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, weak and uncertain. "That's impossible. We would never." "Never what?" I snapped. "Never conspire with Miranda Torres to run an illegal surrogacy ring? Never destroy an old woman's reputation to steal her fortune? Never shove your own mother off a yacht and leave her to die?" I stood still holding the baby. "Which part exactly would you never do, Ethan?" Brianna recovered first, her fear hardening into that cold, calculating confidence I'd seen before. "Prove it," she said sharply. "Say whatever you want, but you can't prove any of it." I smiled for the first time since they'd walked in. "Oh, darling," I said softly. "You really shouldn't have said that." "Carol," I said, still watching the two of them, "would you take Richard Sarah upstairs for his nap, please? The grown-ups need to talk." Once the baby was safely out of earshot, I moved to the mantel. There were photos everywhere. Vacations, weddings, smiling faces, but not a single one of me. I let my fingers brush across the frames, then turned back to face them. "Sit down," I said. My voice came out sharper than I expected, commanding like the woman who once ran Richard's entire company from behind the scenes. They sat looking pale and hollow. "Now," I said, reaching behind the chair cushion and pulling out a thick manila folder, "let me tell you what I've been doing while you've been busy planning my funeral and splitting my estate." I spread the photos across the coffee table. Danny's surveillance shots of Ethan and Brianna meeting with Miranda Torres, the visits to Whitmore Reproductive Services, the payment records. "This," I said, pointing to one photo, "is Miranda Torres. She specializes in what she calls compassionate intervention. In plain English, she helps greedy families like yours murder their elders for money." "That's ridiculous," Brianna said, though her voice wavered as she stared at the evidence. "Is it?" I asked. "Because I have documentation, 6 other cases, all the same pattern. Elderly client. Questionable mental decline. Convenient accident. And every single one of them signed over their assets with Miranda Torres's help. You want to call that coincidence?" Ethan rubbed his face, saying nothing. Brianna's hands trembled. The truth was landing exactly the way I'd hoped, like a blade twisting between them. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I'm done being your victim. And by the time I'm finished, the whole world will know exactly what you've done." I pulled out another stack of documents and spread them across the coffee table. "Like Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, age 73, I said, my voice steady. "She fell down the stairs in her own home 3 weeks after her son started adding sedatives to her nightly tea. He inherited $2 million. Ethan had gone pale. "Mom, you're scaring yourself with conspiracy theories." "Really?" I cut him off. "Then explain. Mr. Charles Bennett, age 68. Died in a single-car accident after his daughter convinced his doctor to adjust his medication. She inherited $4 million. I looked him straight in the eye. "These aren't theories, Ethan. These are murders. And you're part of the same machine that made them happen." "We never killed anyone," Brianna said quickly, her voice shaking. "Even if what you're saying about this Torres woman is true, we never actually hurt anyone." "Really?" I asked quietly. "What about Sarah Collins?" The room went still. "What about the 17-year-old girl whose baby you bought? The one who died during childbirth so you could play happy family? The girl whose death gave you the perfect excuse to inherit my fortune?" Ethan opened his mouth. "We didn't know." "Didn't know what?" I snapped. Didn't know that Miranda Torres was running a black market surrogacy ring? Didn't know those girls kept dying during delivery? Didn't know that you were accomplices to murder? I pulled out another paper, Sarah's death certificate, and tossed it onto the table. According to the medical examiner, Sarah Collins died from unexpected cardiac arrest during delivery. But the nurse who attended that birth told my investigator she was healthy. No risk factors. No distress. Until Miranda Torres administered a so-called routine medication, just minutes before Sarah's heart stopped. Carol, who had quietly returned from upstairs, stood frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Your investigator? Oh yes, I said coldly. Did you really think I was handling this alone? I leaned forward. I have a private investigator, surveillance photos, bank records, medical files, and witness statements. And, I added, walking to what used to be Richard's desk, I have something else. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've been recording this entire conversation. Every word you've said, every admission you've made, every lie you've told. I held it up. And you know what's fun about Massachusetts law? It only takes one party's consent to record a conversation. Since this is still technically my house, I think I qualify. Brianna shot to her feet, shaking. You can't use that. What's the word, entrapment? Actually, I said calmly, it's evidence. Evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Evidence that will put you both in prison for a very long time. Ethan swallowed hard. What do you want? I laughed, and it wasn't a kind sound. What do I want? I repeated. I want my money back. I want that baby placed with a real family who'll love him and tell him the truth about his mother. I want Miranda Torres arrested for the serial killer she is. And I want you two to spend the rest of your lives remembering that you tried to murder your own mother for money. Brianna's eyes darted toward Ethan. And if we cooperate? If you cooperate, I said evenly, I might choose not to press charges for attempted murder. The fraud and conspiracy charges are already out of my hands. But the attempt on my life, that one's mine. I looked at them both, the sun I'd raised, the woman he'd chosen, and felt something inside me go completely still. These weren't family. These were predators who'd mistaken kindness for weakness. You have 24 hours to decide, I said. They chose wrong. Instead of confessing or coming clean, they doubled down. I learned this at 6 the next morning when Danny called Margaret's bed and breakfast, his voice tight with urgency. They're moving fast, he said. I've been monitoring their communications. They were on the phone all night with Torres and someone else. Someone they called the cleaner. I sat bolt upright in bed. What kind of cleaner? The kind who makes problems disappear permanently, he said. They're planning to kill you again. And this time they want a body. No doubt, no loose ends. Margaret, who'd been listening from the doorway, didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone and started dialing before I could even speak. Within 15 minutes, Mark Sullivan's pickup was outside, headlights flashing. We piled in and drove fast into the breaking dawn. How much time do we have? I asked, clutching my bag. Not much, Danny said over the speakerphone. The cleaner they hired flew in from New York early this morning. According to my contact, he's a professional, specializes in making deaths look accidental. And he's never failed. The safe house Danny had arranged turned out to be a weathered little cottage on a private island reachable only by boat. Mark knew the owner, a retired fisherman who owed him a favor and didn't ask questions. We reached it just as the first sunlight hit the water, gold spilling over the Atlantic. I sat at the small kitchen table, a chipped mug of coffee between my hands, trying to breathe through the shock. My own son, I whispered. My own son hired a hitman to finish what he started. People do terrible things for money, Mark said grimly as the waves lapped against the dock outside the cottage. But we're not going to let them get away with it. Danny showed up about an hour later, his expression darker than I'd ever seen it. It's worse than we thought, he said, dropping a folder onto the kitchen table. Miranda Torres isn't just running some small-time inheritance scam. He's part of a network. A massive one. They've been targeting wealthy elderly people across New England for years. He spread out photos and files across the worn wood. I've identified at least 20 suspicious deaths over the past 5 years. All wealthy seniors. all with conveniently greedy relatives. Every case ruled accidental or natural, even when the evidence screams otherwise. I looked up at him horrified. How are they getting away with this? They've got people inside the system, Danny said. Medical examiners, cops, probate judges. It's not a family scam anymore. It's organized crime with a specific target demographic. Rich old people who can't fight back. Margaret, who had refused to stay behind despite the risk, leaned over the table, studying the photos carefully. This woman, she said, pointing to one. I've seen her before. Where? Danny asked. At the hospital where I volunteer, Margaret said slowly. About 6 months ago. She claimed she was with social services, asking about elderly patients who didn't get visitors. Danny and I exchanged a glance. She was scouting for victims. And now they're coming after you, Mark said quietly. Because you're the first one who survived their operation, and you can expose them. Then we need to make sure my story gets told before they can shut me up, I said. The rest of that morning I wrote everything down. Every lie Ethan had told me, every threat, every financial record, every document connecting Torres to those murders. Something happened to me. I wanted the truth to survive. But around noon Danny's phone rang and I knew from his face it wasn't good. He hung up and said flatly, "They found the cleaner." "The what?" I asked. "The man they hired to kill you. Dead in his hotel room. 1 shot to the head, professional execution." "What does that mean?" "It means Miranda Torres's cleaning house," Danny said grimly. "Anyone who can tie her to the operation is being erased, including your son and daughter-in-law." The thought of Ethan being murdered should have terrified me. Instead I felt a dark, icy calm settle over me. "Good," I said quietly. "Let them find out what betrayal feels like." But Mark shook his head. "You don't get it, Margaret. If Torres is tying up loose ends, that includes you. And that baby. An orphaned infant with no legal guardians? She can't afford that risk." My blood ran cold. "Richard, Sarah. She'll have him killed too. She'll make it look like an accident. Gas leak, house fire, whatever it takes." I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee. "We have to get him out of there." "It's too dangerous," Mark said. "They'll be watching the house. Waiting for you." "Then," I said, grabbing my coat, "I'll give them exactly what they're waiting for." The plan was simple, which also made it terrifying. I would walk straight into the lion's den. Pretend to surrender. Let Ethan and Brianna think they'd won. Meanwhile, Danny and Mark would be nearby, ready to step in when Torres made her move. "This is the stupidest plan I've ever heard," Margaret muttered as we packed up to leave the island. "It's the only way to save that baby," I told her. "And to get enough evidence to bring down Torres for good." Danny had been monitoring communications all morning. "Torres is on her way from New York," he said. "She told Ethan and Brianna to keep you alive until she gets there. She wants to question you before arranging your final accident." "They think I'm going to trade my life for the babies," I told Mark as his boat cut through the dark water toward the Gloucester dock. "They have no idea I've been planning this for days." The recording devices had already been planted throughout the house. Hidden cameras, mics in the lamps, transmitters in the vents. Carol had done it all while Ethan and Brianna were out working with Torres. She'd even hidden herself in the basement with the baby, ready to slip out through the old servant's entrance if things went bad. "You sure about this?" Mark asked as we reached shore. "I'm sure that if I don't do it, that innocent baby dies because of my son's greed," I said. "And that's not something I can live with." At exactly 6 o'clock I walked up to my former front door. Ethan answered, looking exhausted and afraid. For just a moment I saw my little boy, the one I used to tuck in at night, the one who used to call me Mommy. "Hello, Ethan," I said softly. "I'm here as promised." Brianna was pacing in the living room, her nerves unraveling. "She'll be here soon," she muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Miranda Torres. She wants to talk to you." "I'm sure she does," I said. Ethan's voice cracked. "Mom, I never wanted it to go this far." "But you let it," I said simply. "You let it go this far because $3 billion meant more to you than your mother's life." He couldn't look at me. The clock on the mantel ticked once, twice. Then the doorbell rang. Right on time. Miranda Torres had arrived. She was smaller than I'd imagined. Neat, professional, the kind of woman you'd expect to see balancing spreadsheets, not body counts. She walked into my former living room with the calm of someone who'd done this many times before. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said smoothly, extending a manicured hand as though we were meeting at a business luncheon. "I'm so glad you survived your little boating accident. We have quite a lot to discuss." "I'm sure we do," I replied. She sat across from me, legs crossed, opening a sleek leather portfolio. "You've caused a great deal of trouble for my clients," she said matter-of-factly. "Ethan and Brianna followed instructions perfectly, and yet here you are, very much alive and apparently very well informed about things that don't concern you." "Murder concerns me," I said. "Especially when it's my own." Miranda smiled faintly. "I prefer to think of what we do as estate planning acceleration. We help families access inheritances that might otherwise be tangled in years of probate." "By killing their relatives?" I asked. "By providing peace," she said smoothly, "an end to confusion and fear. A dignified death that allows families to remember their loved ones as they were, not as they become." I stared at her, trying to process the sheer arrogance of it. "How many?" She tilted her head. "How many what? How many people have you killed?" She glanced down at her portfolio as though she were checking a meeting calendar. "Over the past 5 years, my clients and I have successfully resolved 37 cases involving elderly individuals whose continued existence created financial and emotional hardship." 37 murders, I said quietly. She nodded, smiling like a woman proud of her quarterly report. "And I'm supposed to be number 38? "Oh, Mrs. Sullivan," she said with a tiny laugh. "You'll actually be number 39. We had to resolve another matter earlier today. A gentleman who'd grown too curious about our work. But yes, I'm afraid you'll be needing another accident. A more permanent one." "And the baby?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Tragic carbon monoxide leak," she said smoothly. "These old houses, you know, such faulty heating systems." I turned toward Ethan and Brianna. They sat on the sofa, pale and motionless like mannequins. "This is what you wanted?" I asked. "Not just my death, but an innocent baby's too?" Neither said a word. "The child is a loose end," Torres continued. "His existence complicates the inheritance and his origins raise questions. Much simpler to remove him now than claim you're tragically childless and in need of emotional support. The kind only significant wealth can provide." That was when I smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Miss Torres," I said lightly, "I think there's something you should know." "And what's that?" "You're under arrest." The words had barely left my mouth when the front and back doors exploded inward. Agents flooded the room from every direction, through windows, the basement, even the side patio. In an instant, the living room was filled with shouts, flashing badges, and drawn weapons. "Miranda Torres," a woman's voice boomed. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering." Torres's mask of composure cracked. She bolted for the kitchen, but only made it 6 feet before 3 agents took her down on my old hardwood floors. Ethan and Brianna sat frozen, still trying to process what was happening as the same agent, Special Agent Sarah Chin, turned to them and began reading their rights. Then she looked at me, smiling. "Margaret Sullivan, that was incredibly dangerous, and brilliantly executed." It turned out that Danny Crawford wasn't just a private investigator. He was a former FBI agent, working undercover on a federal task force investigating the very network Torres had built. "My case gave us the perfect setup," Agent Chin explained later as crime scene techs swarmed the house. "We'd been tracking her for 2 years, but she never left fingerprints. Always used intermediaries, always had deniability. Until today." "Until today," I said, "when she confessed to 37 murders, and plotted 2 more, on federal recording equipment." At that moment, Carol came up from the basement holding baby Richard Sarah, both safe and sound. "Is it over?" she asked shakily. "It's over," I said, taking the baby into my arms. "At least the dangerous part. The legal part took months." Ethan and Brianna were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, elder abuse, and accessory to murder in the death of Sarah Collins. They both took plea deals, 25 years for Ethan, 20 for Brianna. Miranda Torres went to trial unrepentant to the end. She was convicted on all counts, life in prison, no parole. The rest of her network crumbled. 17 others were arrested. Doctors, lawyers, financial advisors, even judges. All of them part of the web that had stolen more than $200 million from elderly victims across 6 states. But the most important part wasn't the money or the convictions. It was the baby. Richard Sarah Sullivan. The living proof that good could still come from horror. That sometimes justice isn't just about punishment but about survival, truth, and the chance to begin again. I legally adopted him not long after the trial ended, with the full support of the court and of Sarah Collins's extended family, who had been found living quietly in Canada. They were grateful that someone was willing to raise Sarah's son, to tell him the truth about his brave young mother who had risked everything to give him a better life. His full name is Richard Sarah Sullivan, I told the family court judge that day. Richard for his grandfather, Sarah for his birth mother, and Sullivan because that's the family that will love him, raise him, and tell him exactly where he came from. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had followed the case closely, smiled. I think Sarah Collins would be proud of how her story ended, she said. That was 5 years ago. I'm 72 now, and Richard Sarah is a bright, curious little boy who already knows more about courage and truth than most adults. He knows his birth mother was a brave teenager who loved him. He knows his adoptive father and stepmother tried to use him in a scheme that cost that young woman her life. And he knows that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones you have to protect yourself from. Margaret Collins still runs her little bed and breakfast by the harbor. Though these days she also works as a quiet consultant, helping other seniors who fear their families might not have their best interests at heart. Mark Sullivan still takes his boat out most mornings, guiding fishing charters and tourists around the Cape. Locals call him a legend, the man who once pulled a grandmother out of the Atlantic and ended up helping her take down a murder ring. And Danny, Special Agent Crawford these days, still works for the FBI. Every Christmas he sends me a card with pictures of other elderly people he's helped protect. Every photo is a reminder that what we did mattered. As for Ethan and Brianna, they're still in prison. Ethan writes to me sometimes, long, rambling letters full of excuses, explanations, apologies. He claims he was manipulated, that he didn't understand what he'd become part of. Maybe he even believes that. I don't write back. Because here's what I learned during my week as a dead woman. Family isn't about blood or obligation or inheritance. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Who protects you, who chooses love over greed, truth over comfort, courage over silence. Richard, Sarah, and I, we have that kind of family now. The kind where nobody gets pushed off boats. Nobody steals trust funds. And nobody has to die so someone else can live rich. It's a better family than the one I was born into. And definitely better than the one I raised. Thanks for listening. If you made it this far, don't forget to subscribe and tell me your story.